Hello. It has recently been reported that both Italy and Austria are due to loosen their COVID restrictions. And also, the Isle of Man has now ended its lockdown and all social distancing. It's interesting to note how, whilst the mainstream media have not really had much to say about Italy and Austria, they've reported on the Isle of Man. I would like to suggest some things about this story. There's a very strong indication that the reason for the loosening of these restrictions in both Italy and Austria is to do with pushback from the public. Italy recently, I believe 50,000 restaurants opened in defiance of the government. So the public basically broke that aspect of the restrictions. And here in this news article related to Italy, it states, the World Health Organization's European branch warned on Thursday it was too early to ease up due to a still very high presence of the virus. That's a load of rubbish, by the way, because the WHO also stated that the PCR test that they've been using is not fit for purpose and it's leading to false positives. I've discussed that in an early video, but there you go. Yes, Italy is bucking the trend, said Walter Ricciardi, a public health expert who advises Italy's health minister on the pandemic. He told the Associated Free Press lockdown measures adopted in Italy over Christmas and New Year helped stabilise virus numbers without lowering them. Nevertheless, right now it is extremely difficult to propose stricter measures due to resistance from both politicians and public opinion, Ricciardi said. And in relation to Austria, we have this news article from Reuters stating that Austria will loosen its coronavirus lockdown next week, switching to a nighttime curfew from all-day restrictions on movement and letting non-essential shops and schools reopen. Epidemiologically, the issue is clear. The safest course would be to remain in lockdown, Chancellor Sebastian Kurz told the news conference. But we know there is also children's need to go back to school, there's the necessity of doing everything to keep unemployment as low as possible, and there are, of course, the social and psychological aspects that must also be taken into account, he said, adding the easing will start on February the 8th. So both these articles are in effect acknowledging that the public have basically forced them to ease these restrictions. Now, this isn't a complete victory. This isn't the end of the whole thing, but it does show that when the public say no and they push back, they are effectively forcing the governments to change things and ease restrictions. Public pushback works, and we need more and more pushback on all aspects of the COVID regime in Austria, in Italy, and of course in Britain and elsewhere. We need to push back on the masks, on the distancing, on all the closure of so-called non-essential businesses. When there is a mass resistance, the governments cannot do anything. They are forced to loosen the restrictions because there is no way they can police it. Now, the Isle of Man has also ended its lockdown, its so-called circuit breaker lockdown. Now, the Isle of Man is a separate jurisdiction from the rest of the UK. But the interesting thing is, BBC News, which is BBC is just a complete propaganda machine funded largely by Big Pharma, they are suggesting that they I don't know the reason why Isle of Man's generally been easy on the whole thing. The fact is that Isle of Man, they did have original lockdown, I believe, but it was all ended back in June initially, and then after Christmas they had a circuit breaker lockdown for a few weeks, and now that's now been lifted. I don't know how that fits into the whole global scheme, but nevertheless, what the BBC are doing is they are using this Isle of Man story to suggest that if we just keep all the rules, if we just suck it up, then we in the UK, the rest of Britain, will all get out of lockdown as well. That's the narrative they're pushing through the Isle of Man story. There you go. The Isle of Man got out of it by keeping the rules so the rest of us can, that's how it will be for the rest of us. Here it states in this BBC article that Mr. Quayle, the chief minister, stated the lifting of the circuit breaker restrictions was a result of collective determination, sense of duty, and community spirit of the Manx people. Well, that is, frankly, in a sense, a load of rubbish if you're going to push this narrative that if we just keep the rules and be very strict on ourselves, then that's the way out. Because the fact is, there has never been any scientific justification for any of these lockdowns or any of the restrictions. All we hear is XXX numbers of people are dying and saying nothing about the context of those deaths. If you just dig a little bit deeper, just 5-10 minutes of research can tell you that there is absolutely no scientific justification. So if there was no scientific justification for taking us into lockdown, how is the government going to find some scientific justification for taking us out and easing the restrictions? I can't comment exactly on what the government of the Isle of Man are doing. They're a very small island. But what I can say is that if we do have mass resistance and pushback from the public, that, in my view, is the only way we can guarantee a way out of the COVID regime. If the public say no and don't comply with all the diktats that are being imposed upon us, then the government will have no option but to put an end to it, because they realise that the people do not believe them anymore and the businesses aren't going to comply. They cannot police it. They will basically have the tail between their legs and the public will ensure it's over. And that's the way it's got to be. So I believe that this Isle of Man story has been put out by the BBC and mainstream media for propaganda purposes, but they've deliberately not spoken about Italy and Austria, because the reason why Italy and Austria had their restrictions loosened was specifically because the public pushed back. Thank you for watching.